There he is. Good. So we have a new member. Well, he's not officially a new member, but we have our last seat on the FinCom. It's going to be filled hopefully soon with Ray Andrews, who's going to be observing our meeting tonight. He's not official, so he can't vote. And I think he has to leave it.
And watching us.
There he is. There he is. He's going to watch. So welcome, Ray. We'll hear from you next meeting when it's official. Okay.
I'll maintain radio silence today. Yes. In fact,
Does this mean we don't get to scare them off?
We're going to try our best.
Yeah.
that's possible.
Okay. So
I
we
was just
have.
watching the September 24th meeting, and I'm already a little scared.
As you should be, Ray.
Okay. It's 7:02. We have a quorum. I am going to call Mary Hartman. I'm the chair of the Finance Committee. I'm going to call the November 19th Finance Committee meeting to order. This meeting is being broadcast. It's a webinar. It's being recorded as well. In order to take the roll call tonight, instead of just going around and having people introduce themselves, I'm going to call out people's names because I'm getting some feedback that some of the viewers aren't hearing everybody's names. So I'm going to speak them. And if you're here, say here. And if you're not here, don't say anything. Dean Banfield. Kathy Vocalo.
Here.
Greg Gorillo.
Here.
John Hickling.
Here.
Dick Jameson.
Here.
Dee Ortner. Here. Parashar Patel.
Here.
Christine Reynolds.
Here.
Wade Rubenstein.
Here.
Phil Swain.
Here.
Brian Taylor. Lois Wassoff.
Here.
Andrea Zoll is on the couch. Great. Okay. And then Dean, I see you're here. Dean Banfield, you're here.
I'm here.
Great. Okay, good. Thank you. I'm going to start the meeting by reviewing the minutes. I think we have the minutes from August 4th. Do I have any comments, corrections that we need to make to these minutes?
I have one very minor correction. I got to figure out which page. Hold on a second. On page 3, the third paragraph down, about after the parens 60,000 each, which might jump out at you if you're looking at that. It says she anticipates that Chromebooks will be leased for 4 years. The school doesn't buy Chromebooks. They're buying MacBooks. So just change it to MacBooks.
I don't know where you are, Dean. Where are you?
I'm sorry, I'm on page 3 of the minutes, the third paragraph down.
Yeah. Dean,
And then it says, and about 2/3 of the way into that paragraph, it says 60,000 each. That might
Yes.
jump out at you.
Yes.
She anticipates that Chromebooks will be leased for 4 years. Just change that to MacBooks.
I think at the time, Dean, they were looking at two different options.
Yes.
So Chromebooks might have been mentioned.
I honestly, I've never been to a school committee meeting where they've recommended them.
No, they didn't, but they were considering it because it was a cheaper option.
I know. Okay. But I really think, well, we can
okay.
ask I don't know. All right. We can leave it if you want. It's fine. I don't mind. I just think that that's not consistent with anything that the school has suggested in the past. And I don't know that you would pay $779 for a Chromebook, but maybe you would. I don't know.
Okay, I will ask Anita to go look at the video of this and clarify. How's that?
Okay. That's
Okay.
Okay, I just checked my notes and I wrote down Chrome, but I'd be happy to check the video.
okay.
Great. Thank you, Anita. Thank you. Anything else? Did anybody pick up anything else?
So, Mary, I move approval pending verification of proposed amendment.
Second. Good. I'll take a roll. Dean?
Yes.
Kathy Corcolo?
Yes.
Greg Gorillo?
Yes.
John Hickling?
Yes.
Dick Jameson?
Yes.
Dee Ortner?
Yes.
Parashar Patel,
Yes.
Christine Reynolds,
Yes.
Wade Rubenstein,
Yes.
Phil Swain,
Yes.
Brian still, oh, Brian, here you are. Brian Taylor,
I'm here. Are we voting on something?
we're voting,
Minutes.
you can
We're approving
abstain.
the minutes.
I'll abstain, sorry.
Lois Wassoff,
Yes.
Andrea Zoll,
Yes.
good. And also, so Brian, now you're now on the meeting. That's great. So we have a full house tonight. And me, Mary Hartman, I approve them as well. The minutes as once Anita reviews the video. Okay. The next thing on our agenda is, let me see, I got to find the agenda. Carrie's going to give us a presentation on the where we are so far with the revenue and fixed cost projections for FY22.
Okay, Parshar, tell me what do I need to do to get off this presenter mode?
Here is the third one over where your cursor was.
Oh, good now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So I sent you out a presentation a little earlier today. I've made a couple of adjustments. So after the meeting tonight, I'll resend this. This is going to be our first look at our revenue to be available for fiscal 22 and fixed costs. So just as an overview, I've created a low estimate and a high estimate for each line item. And then to create the worst case scenario and the best case scenario, I've paired the low estimate with the high fixed cost estimate and the high revenue estimate with the low fixed cost estimate. The worst case scenario shows a total reduction in revenue of about $245,000, which when you add that to the fixed costs, it would result in an amount available to guidelines of about a reduction of about 1.95 million over the current fiscal year, which is a reduction of about 2.18%. The best case scenario shows an increase in total revenue of about 3.7 million, which would allow growth in guidelines of about 3 million or 3.38%. So first going through revenue, we have 4 classes of revenue: property tax, state aid, local receipts, and available funds. And I will go through each of these in a little more detail, but on a high level, property tax, the growth is about 3 million to about 3.5 million. And this is entirely dependent upon new growth. And
Carrie, can I interrupt you for just a minute?
Sure.
Do you want questions now or do you want to wait until the end?
You know what? I don't mind questions now, but people are going to have to speak up or interrupt me because it's hard to, sharing the screen, it's hard to see everybody. So I do not mind if people want to ask questions.
Let me ask a question then.
Sure.
When you say the property tax, the low and the high estimate for property tax, this is assuming a 2.5% increase or not?
Yes, it is assuming it is assuming an increase, and I'll get into that a little bit in the next slide.
Go ahead.
So
Can you define, this is Greg, can you define new growth for the newcomer so that they understand? I know I didn't realize that at first.
Yes, so new growth is the increased value, assessed value in the community. So for instance, if there's a new home that is built that wasn't on the tax rolls the prior year, the value of that home is new growth. But also any adjustments to existing value. So your home, if you add an addition, the tax associated with the increase in assessed value is also considered new growth. and the same for businesses, including personal property tax. So if you now have a business that you're running out of your home that you didn't have in the prior year, the equipment that you use for that business is taxed as personal property. And if it's new, it would be part of new growth.
So Carrie, the change in the property tax number is a function of two things. It's 2.5% on the base plus new growth. Is that correct?
Plus any overrides or exempt debt would also be added to that.
Okay.
And in the next slide, we'll go through that in a little more detail. In terms of state aid, right now I'm projecting a slight decrease in state aid to a slight increase. You probably know, if you're tracking the state budget, that they do not have a fiscal 21 budget yet adopted, but it is going through the process, and we're not too far from having that adopted. In a normal year, in December, the state would start talking about revenue for the following fiscal year. So I'm hoping that they'll pass the budget sometime this month or early next month, and they'll continue along their traditional path of starting revenue discussions. And then in January, the governor will release his budget. In terms of local receipts, I'm projecting right now anywhere from a decrease of $820,000 to an increase of about $780,000. The issues here are the continuing impact of the pandemic on the local economy. And then we always like to see that first motor vehicle excise commitment, which comes out in February, which gives us an indication of what we might see in terms of growth in motor vehicle excise tax, which is the largest local receipt category. And then in available funds, projecting a decrease of anywhere from $2 million. Well, it seems kind of strange to say that back. Anywhere from $634,000 to $2 million, and this really has to do with the availability of free cash. So in terms of property tax.
This is Brasher. Are you going to go over that last one in a little bit more detail later?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so in terms of property tax, just the calculation, we start here. Can you see my cursor?
Yes.
Yes, okay, so the starting point here is last year's base. So we start with last year's base, we add in the 2.5%, then we add in new growth, and we add in exempt debt to come up with what is the maximum amount that we can levy in any fiscal year. So in the two scenarios, the difference is this new growth. So in the worst case scenario, the new growth is $500,000. And in the best case scenario, it's $900,000. Now, the reason that there's such a swing here is because new growth is, we will be collecting new growth through June 30 of 2021. Right now, building permit receipts look pretty good. They're not really tracking much behind where they were last year, but you have to keep in mind that not all building permits result in increased assessed valuation. So a building permit for a new home or an addition, swimming pool, those things, well, maybe not even swimming pools, but those things result in increased assessed value. But if you're remodeling your home, if you're replacing your kitchen, that doesn't necessarily increase your assessed value. So we don't know until our inspectors go out, for instance, on a remodel. Is the remodel that you're doing something that's going to increase your value? Is there a question?
Carrie, it's Kathy.
Yeah.
quick question. Can you explain debt exclusion to me in terms of how that gets added into the property tax?
Yes. So we have, and our debt exclusions almost entirely are for school projects. So voters have the option to exclude debt, meaning you don't have to raise it within your levy. You can add it on top of the levy, the maximum levy, as long as it is approved at town meeting and at the ballot. So all of our school projects, the debt associated with the school projects, the elementary school, the high school, our share of the Minuteman High School, those were all excluded or exempt from the levy based on a town meeting vote and a ballot vote.
Isn't it safe to say that it's an override for debt?
The only reason I don't like to say it's an override, because the excluded debt, the authority to tax goes away when the debt is paid, and an override is permanent. So in a sense, yes, it's an override for debt as long as you understand that as the debt is satisfied, the authority to levy goes away.
Got it.
So for fiscal year 22,
yes,
we're adding in 7,123,000 to the required tax collection.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
To cover that debt. One thing I want to mention is, and we'll take a look at what our historical property tax collections are, but state law requires us to assume we are going to collect 100% of the property tax that is levied. Mm-hmm. So we're not able to have an allowance for doubtful payment or anything like that. We have to assume 100%. So in terms of where we start the process for fiscal 22, you really have two, I think, logical starting points. You can either say, and I've put this in the best case scenario, that as our starting point before we want to talk about what makes sense, we will hold the unused levy capacity at the same percent to total as the prior year, which you can see 4.35%. 4.35% is where we are in the current year. Or you could hold it at the same dollar amount. And so if we were to hold it at the same dollar amount, it has the effect of increasing the unused levy capacity. So those really are, I think, the 2 points, and you can decide which one you would like to go with. In terms of what is the impact of these scenarios to the existing base. So the worst case scenario, the impact to the existing base is about 2.63%. It calculated at 2.54, but it's essentially the 2.5% that we're allowed to increase by law, plus another 0.09% increase over the current year for the existing debt, because you can see the debt service, the existing exempt debt goes up in fiscal 22 because of Minuteman. There's an increase in, I believe it has to do with Minuteman. So then new growth under the worst case scenario is about another 0.5%. So the total change in the levy is about 3.16. Then under the best case scenario, where we would hold the levy at the 4.35%, which would give us a little more, that is an increase to the existing base of 2.7%. Plus we have that same 0.09% for the exempt debt. And then the difference in the new growth. So under the best case scenario, new growth goes up an extra $400,000. So that means the total change in the levy is 3.73%.
Carrie, I've got to stop here for a minute because I'm having trouble with this. If I look at the line that says the change in the tax levy coming from existing taxpayer,
Yeah.
and I show the worst case at 2.63, can I translate that into the change in the property tax bills for?
You can, if you make the assumption that your assessed value is going up in the same or stays relative to the increase. So if the total assessed value in town is going up 2%, if your assessed value is going up 2% or around 2%,
Got it.
you would see that. But if you're going up higher, obviously there would be a change.
Okay, then help me understand why in the worst case, the increase to the median value is 2.63, but in the best case, it's 2.78.
Because of the increase in, so the worst case, it's the change in the unused levy capacity.
Okay, so in the best case, we have a lower headroom in the levy. Less.
Well, actually, Carrie Carrie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the terminology best case and worst case, I think is from a revenue perspective, Mary, and not necessarily from a taxpayer perspective of does my tax bill go up more or less? Is that correct?
I would agree with that.
Okay. That may be what might be throwing you off, Mary?
Yes, it is. It is. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Go ahead.
All right, so let's take a look at the historical property tax collection rate. And I'm only able to go back to fiscal 11 because we have been using our current accounting system since fiscal 11. And I don't have access to collection rates prior to that. I don't have easy access to that. So in terms of, this shows real estate tax collection, personal property tax collection at the end of the fiscal year. The orange line is at the end of the fiscal year. The blue line, I put this, I don't know if any of you were tracking with the select board, but there was a point in time where the select board, it felt like just about every week they were asking me, what's the collection rate? And so this is the last time, I put this together for them back in May. And you can see back in May, we definitely had some issues. Our collection rate was falling behind where it had been for prior years, but really the issue here is the state gave us the authority to waive penalties and interest through June 30. So your last tax bill would have been due May 1st, but there were no penalties and interest until June 30. And so we definitely saw people who maybe had the ability to pay, but chose not to, because why wouldn't you if you could keep hold of your money? Oops. So then over here on personal property tax, really, or maybe I didn't finish my thought here. So real estate tax collections during this period of time, very, very, very consistent. Personal property tax, it is up and down, but it's such a small dollar amount that it doesn't really have a huge impact. It might be easier to see here, just looking at the data behind the charts. You can see that our collection rate as of the end of the fiscal year is very consistent, 90, 99 for the most part, 99 or 98 to 99%. And again, personal property tax, you can see some low points, but the personal property tax levy is 700,000 or so per year. So it doesn't have a huge impact on our overall collection.
Hey, Carrie, how can the personal property tax fall off between May and the end of June? I don't understand.
It had to be a refund or an abatement that was processed late.
Okay.
That does happen. Was there another question?
No, this is Brian. I was just trying to make sense of the blue and the yellow line, but this data is helpful. So the 5.5 is really the difference between May and the June final number. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so then in the next slide, I just picked yesterday to see and ran years each year as of November 17th. What did it look like? So I could add in the current fiscal 21. And again, if you look at the percent collected as of November 17th each year for property tax, you're seeing 49% or so. So we're not seeing any drop off in collections. And if what you collect as of November 17th is indicative of what you will collect at the end of the year, we're just not seeing anything remarkable here. Any additional questions on property tax before I move forward?
Sorry, Carrie, can I just ask one quick question about new growth?
Yeah.
I didn't have a chance to get it in earlier. At one point, we talked about breaking down the constituents of that new growth category. As you pointed out, some are more important and more meaningful than others, and trying to track them to have some better visibility and sort of better degree of confidence in what the numbers were doing. Is that something that we ever looked into any further?
Could you talk about that a little bit more? I'm not sure I'm remembering.
Well, we talked about looking at the constituents, the components of new growth. And as you pointed out, a new single family residence was a lot more impactful than a kitchen renovation. And we talked about looking at the breakdown and trying to, as best we could, track them as we went along for better visibility in terms of forecasting this number. And I'm just wondering if that ever got any traction or whether it's still of any interest for that matter.
So where our new growth is coming from.
Yeah, so that we can forecast it and track it, with a greater degree of confidence.
No, I do remember that now. I'd have to touch base with the assessor again on that, and I'd be happy to do so. I don't think we have the best ability to do that I'm not sure that we're tracking that so much now, or it might be difficult to do. We certainly report new growth in terms of whether it's coming from real estate, personal, commercial, industrial. But I'll talk to him about that again and see what he might be able to provide.
That's fine. We can put it aside for another time. I was just, we had discussed it and I wondered if you thought it would be helpful.
Yeah. Okay, so in terms of state aid, I mentioned the fiscal 21 state budget has not yet been adopted. We're hoping that they'll start talking about 22 revenue next month. The governor's budget will be issued at the end of January. The concerns here are that the state dipped into its own stabilization fund to hold fiscal 21 state aid harmless. And as you can see, we're actually seeing a slight increase in state aid in 21. So the state really dug into, they didn't really dip into it, they dug into their stabilization fund. So that's of concern going into fiscal 22. In terms of the way that I projected fiscal 22, under the worst case scenario, I'm assuming that that Chapter 70 will be at the same level in fiscal 21. And I can tell you this may be somewhat pessimistic because in the last 20 years, the state has only cut Chapter 70 one time, And the one time that they did that was because there was federal aid coming directly to municipalities to plug that hole. So in all of the other years, they haven't cut Chapter 70. So it would really be unprecedented for them to cut Chapter 70 in fiscal 22. But again, I am concerned about the use of their own stabilization fund in fiscal 21. So I'd like to start from a little bit of a conservative place. What they have cut, not that often, but they have cut the unrestricted general government aid. And so I'm assuming, and additionally, what they have cut is the pilot payments that they make to communities that host state facilities. So for us, we have the prison, which is the largest state-owned facility. So we receive a pilot payment from them. They have made cuts to that in the past. I'm assuming in the worst case scenario, a 9% cut to both of these lines. In the best case scenario, I'm assuming that they're going to increase Chapter 70 2% and pretty much hold everything else harmless at the same level as fiscal 21. So, question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's a minor question, but back on the state pilot question, the big footprint is obviously the Concord MCI. Do we get any pilot money because we have the armory here in town, or is that not really a thing?
We get pilots. I can tell you this pilot payment is for all state property. So however many properties the state owns in town, and I honestly don't know off the top of my head, but this is for more.
You don't get a breakout. It's just a number. Okay.
Yeah, this is for more than just MCI.
Okay.
Barry, this is Roger. A couple of questions for you.
Yeah.
One is, how much did the state dig into the state stabilization fund? Was it 20%, 30%'s gone? Do you know offhand what?
I believe it was, they drew down 1/3 of their balance.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then why 9%? Was that, how did you get at 9 versus 10 or 15?
You know, it's really, I guess it's mostly a gut feeling right now. You know, over the last 20 years, there haven't been a lot of cuts. You know, should it be 10? Should it be 15? That seemed a little severe, and so I went with 9.
That's fine. And then just one last quick question on Chapter 70. I hear what you're saying in terms of fiscal year 20 level, but I'm kind of curious, is it possible for the state to, in essence, try to keep the total Chapter 70 money going out of state coffers neutral to 21, but do it in a redistributive manner that has wealthier towns taking a hit so that less wealthy towns can actually see an increase?
That is possible. There has been, over the years, there has been talk about doing that. And what ends up happening is there's always a nominal increase to everybody, and some communities get more.
Okay, thank you.
There's really a reluctance by the governor and the legislature to cut the education aid. Dee, I'm sorry I cut you off.
That's all right. That's all right. I just have a couple of questions. One, have you heard anything about federal aid at all?
In terms of anything for fiscal 22?
Right.
No, we haven't.
Okay. And my other question is, with your worst scenario and your best scenario, which way are you leaning?
You know, it's a little early to say. I can tell you, as I went through and put this presentation, was, you know, setting up the presentation today, there were a couple of things I felt that maybe I was being a little too pessimistic on. You know, I would have to say I'm leaning more towards the worst case scenario, but you know, if the finance committee is, you know, depending on what you want to do with property tax or free cash, when we get to talk about that, you know, that could make a big difference. If you wanted to keep the unused levy capacity at the percent and not the dollar, that provides a little bit of aid. And the worst case scenario shows no transfer from free cash, no $1 million transfer. If you wanted to do that, you know, those couple of things would make a big difference in producing sort of a middle of the road scenario, if you will.
Thank you.
So in terms of local receipts, here's where I'm thinking I might be a little bit pessimistic. The reductions that I'm suggesting are, you know, a slight reduction in the excise category as a whole. And, you know, there's a big reduction between, you know, the estimate for 22, 21 versus what we saw in fiscal 20. And the issue here has to do with the loss of revenue for meals tax and rooms tax. Fines and forfeitures, you know, a pretty big reduction here. But I think the issue is taxpayers. We don't have a lot of taxpayers who are behind in taxes, but it's probably reasonable to think that anybody who's behind now is probably not going to be catching up. And so we're not going to be, or maybe we will have the opportunity to waive penalties and interest. So I do think that we're going to see less in fines in fiscal 22. This next category here, uses of money and property, this is where we include rental of town-owned property and investment income. And so in the worst case scenario, I'm projecting a lower amount in interest earnings, which is probably too pessimistic, because we, you know, day in and day out tend to have pretty similar balances in our accounts. And so and we're not earning a ton of interest anyway, so that's probably a little too pessimistic. But I have reduced rental income. You know, Harvey Wheeler is one of the buildings that we typically see a lot of rental income, and that building is not open for renting. So that's that makes a difference. In licenses and permits, I again am probably in the worst case scenario being a little too pessimistic. So here is some new and exciting data that I was able to plop into your presentation at the last minute. I think around 6 o'clock, the Department of Local Services sent out an email and announced that they now are making room occupancy and meals tax data available to the public, which you've probably heard me say in the past, they wouldn't make this available. So I wanted to put this in, but all they have up right now is fiscal 19, 20, and 21. But I thought this was interesting. Up here on the top, it's the room occupancy tax. It shows the tax liability. So this is not what was collected, but this is what was reported in total by month by all of the taxpayers as being owed. And you can see that in 2019, in July, the tax liability was about $86,000 from 6 establishments. We had a big jump in 20, And I'd honestly have to get into this to see why we had 48 versus 6. I know some of it has to do with Airbnb and the like, but it's interesting to see now in fiscal 21, we only have slightly over half of the establishments that we had in 20 that are submitting returns. What is interesting, though, here is the percent reduction between July of this year versus July of last year. And you can see it's coming down. I don't know if that's much of an indicator, but about a 10% decrease in the reduction, a decrease in the reduction for, that's like a double negative, I guess. If you look at 20 versus 19, though, you can definitely see the impact of the pandemic, essentially February or so. What to me is interesting is why, and we've talked about this before, why the reduction in October, November, December, in the time of year when we have a lot of visitors to Concord. I'm not sure why we saw a reduction then, but we did.
Can you help me understand what the number of returns actually is? I'm not clearly following what this is all about. The way I'm viewing this is it seems that we should, from 6 to 48 suggests that there should be a higher tax liability, but maybe I'm just looking at this data wrong.
So the number of returns are the number of establishments filing taxes in this category by month. So I'm happy to dig into this more, but that's what that number indicates.
So Brian, if it's Airbnb, right, they're collecting very small amounts, but they might be a number, the volume might be high.
Airbnb. Thanks so much, Christine. That explains it.
So Carrie, you said that this information was just made available. And is this consistent with the estimates that you made earlier for local receipts? Or
I'm going to use this and take another look at our at my estimates.
Okay.
And see. This number is, again, this is the liability, not necessarily the collection.
Right.
I think it tracks pretty close to the
Right.
collection. I think both of these numbers do.
Okay.
So I do think that the collection is pretty close to 100% of the liability, but I'll go back and take another look at it.
Great.
Down here, the bottom half is the meals tax. And this is interesting because we have, almost the same number of establishments filing returns. So that's good news. But you can see, they're doing less business.
Right.
And so we'll have to keep tracking this, and see what, what we can do. Hopefully we'll be able to bump up these estimates a little bit, but it has to do with how fast people are going to feel comfortable in returning to their normal activities once a vaccine is available. Any questions on local receipts before we move to available funds? Okay, so available funds really are everything that's other than a property tax, state aid, or a local receipt. And here we're typically talking about free cash, our appropriations from free cash, the transfers we make from enterprise funds or other funds to cover the services that the general fund provides on behalf of these other funds, and then the pilot payment that we receive from the light plant. So the big change here is, what's going to happen with free cash? What do we want to do with free cash? In the worst case scenario, I'm saying nothing from free cash to offset property taxes. In the best case scenario, I'm saying $1 million, which is historically what we have pulled from free cash. So just notes, I've just put the transfers from enterprise funds at $2.5 million. Again, this is a dollar for dollar. So if the general fund is providing $50,000 worth of service to the light plant, we're charging them $50,000. So it's a wash. So I've just put the $2.5 million here, maybe higher or maybe lower, but any change here is going to be offset by a corresponding increase or decrease in expenditure.
Carrie, I have a question on that. So this is services that are provided by like your department and other, IT and so forth, the overhead categories in the town. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
So those costs are pretty fixed, right? So if the light plant or someone doesn't use services to the same extent, would you be reducing staff? Is it really variable, I guess is what I'm asking you. Does it really mean that costs are moving up and down, or are you simply just getting paid less by them?
I guess it depends. It depends on what it is. For instance, I have a budgeted position in finance that is a collects utility bills, processes utility bill payments. If we stop providing that service and the light plant picked that up, well, that position would be eliminated.
Okay. But if you did 30% less work, you'd probably still have the position.
Yeah, I guess we would have to take a look at everything in total and make that decision.
Okay.
So, Carrie, one question. There's been talk of a stabilization fund for the middle school, starting one, right?
We have started one.
And so where does that come into the picture here to fund it?
It would come in when we started having debt service associated with that project.
Parashar, it came out of free cash. You'll see that when you'll see it later on. It's not in this chart. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that's what I wanted to figure out where that's coming from.
Yeah, so because it'll show up in FY21, right, Carrie? So you don't see it here yet, but it'll show up as we put it aside, if you will, right?
It'll show up as a reduction in free cash.
Right.
Sure.
And so then that goes into the question I have is, I know technically we wouldn't put it into the budget for fiscal year 2022, but is there a way to try to figure out proactively, if we do the same thing for fiscal year 22A, can we do the same thing? Do we want to do the same thing? And if so, how could that potentially change?
That's the problem.
Parashar, I think the question that we have in front of us now is, do we want to do the $1 million that we typically do? The stabilization fund was a one-off thing that we did that we'll see as far as how the impact is on free cash. The question for FY22 that we have to wrestle with is, do we want to do the normal 1 million that we routinely do?
Yeah.
No, I agree with that. I guess I'm asking, should we try to wrestle with the other one as well? That's what I'm getting at.
You mean more stabilization?
No, he doesn't understand the limit, right? Yeah. Explain the limit.
Well, I think when we get to the free cash, you'll see, well, When you get to the free cash slide, you'll see
Yeah, we're at the
we're at the edge.
We're at the edge, assuming we put $1 million in for property tax relief.
That's true.
yes, right.
That's what I'm trying to understand is
Good. That's
should
where
be a
you
balance. That's what I'm trying to understand. Flip
Great.
it.
So that's without the 2 million.
So let's just
There
jump
you
to that. So over here, this is, you've seen some of this before. This was our certified free cash as of the end of the prior fiscal year. So we had just over 10% or close to $12 million. Our policy requirements are somewhere between 5 and 10%. At that time, pre-town meeting, we were just slightly above our policy requirement. At town meeting, we appropriated $1 million to reduce property tax, $500,000 for affordable housing, $2 million for the stabilization fund, $50,000 for school buses. So when you add that total $3.55 million, we were below our maximum amount. I guess that probably can ignore that, but after town meeting appropriation, that brought our certified free cash available down to $8.2 million, which was 7.17%. Now we are in the process of having our free cash certified as of June 30, 2020. And we're projecting the certification to be just under $7 million, or about 6%. We've got a couple of unfortunate issues. Cambridge Turnpike, we have a grant. The state, we have a grant for, or that project is partially grant funded. At the end of the fiscal year, we submitted a little over $1 million as our final request for that grant. We had until September 30 to receive that. We did not receive that from the state by September 30. We will be receiving it in the current fiscal year, but because it's in transit as of the cutoff date of 9/30, they reserve that from free cash, but it will come back to us in free cash for the certification 6/30/2021.
So Carrie, the way the policy works, we can't count it?
It will not be available to be expended.
Okay.
We certainly, you could add it back in, but if our certification is going to have these these reservations.
Oh.
We have a telecommunications capital project. There was some spending close to the end of the fiscal year. It was after we had done our bond issuance. It was not an expenditure that I had anticipated, so it wasn't included as part of the bond issue. So this is going to be a reservation, but this will be included in the bond issue for this fiscal year, so that this will get added back in again for the 6/30/2021. And then we have a handful of other adjustments, which are $152,000 in reservation. So again, this is what we are going to submit to the state for certification, about $7 million, or about 7%. I didn't include it here, but if we reduced this number by $1 million, assuming that we would use $1 million in 22 for property tax relief, that would bring us down to just over 5%. So I think it was 5.19%. So really the bottom of our policy, or the low end of our policy. Now the other issue here is, at this point in time, we wouldn't expect that we would be adding anything to free cash as a result of fiscal 21 operations. Like we're assuming that our revenue projections are pretty tight. We might not collect as much as we expect. We certainly will underspend to the point that we have to make sure we're not ending in a deficit, but it would be highly unlikely for us to end fiscal 21 with much of a balance there. So that's definitely a little bit of a concern. Are there?
Carrie, can you just go back to the previous page? So how does the 6.844 on the right side align with the 6.994, or is that a typo? Then maybe that's a typo.
Oh, it is. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. I just try to figure out how much. Okay, it's a typo. That's all. Thank you.
I have a slightly
no
different
formulas
question.
behind this. These are all hard typed in numbers. Dee, did you
I
have?
have a slightly different question. On the three items which are in effect free cash drawdowns in anticipation of future revenue or future grants or whatever, the third line didn't sound in your description as though this is in the expectation of some future refurbishment of our free cash. Are those just adjustments that were off the books, that we missed something and they will not be replaced? Or do those have another revenue component that comes in later that would somehow replace them?
They're the last. So there are other revenue components that will come in and that will clear these adjustments.
Okay.
But every year we're going to have similar adjustments. So this
year we just have that big grant from the Cambridge Turnpike, which is kind of an outsized thing. It's not.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Carrie, I just have a general question around the minimum of 5%. I mean, we're at 6.1 and we're not, it looks like we're good, but what happens if we were to ever go below 5%?
The only thing that happens is the rating agencies would take notice of that, as they will take notice of us going from consistently being over 10% down to 7%. Will that in and of itself, going from 10% to 7%, they'll notice it. It's not going to impact the rating. Going down below 5%, they definitely would be noting that, because that we don't have free cash is where we hold our reserves. We don't have lots of money in stabilization funds. And so this really impacts our unrestricted reserves to the point where, there may be a negative outlook on the rating.
Carrie, is it safe to say that without the timing issues of the Cambridge Turnpike and the telecommunications, we would be at the 7.17 without using another million for to offset our property tax? Is that true?
Yes, we'd be pretty close. We'd still have this 150.
Okay. The other thing I want us all to remember, though, is that one of the reasons we have free cash is to help us in years when other revenue sources aren't as good as we hoped. So, I'm still on the fence. I'm still undecided about whether using the million or even $500,000 would be the wise thing to do. It's a conversation for later, but I just want people to know that it really is this going from the 7 to the 6 is a temporary thing, and I don't know. I tend to think this is the time. These are the times when we should be using free cash, but we'll talk about that later.
So Carrie, before you go to the next slide, I would just like to have better clarity on the Cambridge Turnpike grant. Is it something that we will not be receiving this year? Is that correct?
We will be receiving it in fiscal 21. We incurred the expense in fiscal 20, and we expected to receive the reimbursement within the period of time that the state allows after the close of the fiscal year. So they allow us to receive it by September 30, as long as the reimbursement request was filed within the fiscal year. But unfortunately, we did not receive it by September 30. So we couldn't count it in fiscal 20, but we will receive it in fiscal 21.
So then that would go on the next free cash estimate sheet for the following year? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So there's no chance we're going to get it on this one?
There's no chance of that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Are we all set here?
Yep.
All right, so fixed costs. In a typical year, in most years, I'm really hesitant to project fixed costs, but this year, really, we have a lot of certainty in our fixed costs. So this is a total of fixed costs under the sort of the worst case scenario. Fixed costs are about 26.7 million, as opposed to in the current year 25.3. In the best case scenario, they're about 25.9. So fixed costs in the best case scenario increase about 660,000. In the worst case, about 1.4 million. Again, resulting in the best case scenario, growth in guidelines of about 3.38%, and in the worst case scenario, a decrease in guidelines of about 2.18%. And on the next slide, I've got some notes about fixed costs. So in terms of group insurance, we are part of a consortium, the Minuteman Neshoba Regional Health Group. That group has a sizable fund balance because people are not using health. They're not going to the doctor. They're not going to the hospital like you typically see in any year. So our fund balance is very sizable. We will start talking. We have a meeting just after Thanksgiving. We'll start talking about the potential of using some of that fund balance to smooth any increase in health insurance for fiscal 22, which we would expect based on trend is going to be pretty low anyway, because we use a rolling 24-month claim average, and our claims are down quite a bit this year. So the best case scenario is a 0% increase in premium, because we will have access likely to fund balance to smooth. The worst case is a 7% increase. Now, I don't expect that we'll see a 7% increase in premium, but the issue that we have is only about 2/3 of our eligible employees are currently enrolled in health insurance. So at open enrollment, we are subject to a big increase in enrollment. Most of our employees that aren't enrolled, it's because their spouse has access to a better plan. That can change at any point in time, or a spouse could lose coverage. And so we have to carry something in our budget, regardless of the increase, to cover fluctuations in enrollment. Our OPEB assessment.
Carrie,
Yeah.
can I start on that point? Is there a way to get the group insurance, the group to give us an estimate, if possible, of how many folks were added to our town employees' coverage because the spouse or family members lost coverage that was provided elsewhere? Because you can enroll if there's a loss of coverage, right? You can go to a new plan. So I'm curious whether they can do that analysis that may help us with that estimate.
Yes, we definitely have access to that data.
Okay. Thanks.
Carrie, I have to interrupt you here for a second. You've got to tell me, it's 8:06 and I know that the superintendent of Minuteman was scheduled to be here at 8 and I think he might be under a time constraint. So
If he's here, I'm happy to stop if you'd like. I mean, this is my,
well, no, I mean, just pause and we'll come back to this because we're not, I want to come to the end where it shows the impact on the guideline, but I'm worried, I'm a little bit concerned about the superintendent from Minuteman, his availability. So do you know, is he there? Is he with us?
He's here.
He's here, great. So Carrie, are you okay with us interrupting you and talking with the superintendent and coming back to you later?
yes, that's fine.
Thank you.
Have I stopped sharing my screen? Yes.
Certainly you have, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So good. So now, Dr. Ed, I'm going to call you Dr. Ed instead of, because if
The
that's
kids
okay,
call me Dr. B.
Dr. B, then I'll call you Dr. B. Thank you for coming. I don't want to take a lot of your time. I know that you've already presented twice to the select board, but I thought it was important that the finance committee get an overview of what you're doing because for me, I think the method that we're using to fund this is a little bit unusual. So I'd like you to quickly, if you could, tell us where you're at and we'll take it from there.
Sure. So I don't know if you got a copy of the PowerPoint presentation that we've been using, but
we did.
Basically where we're at is the MSBA project is coming to a close. We had more funds available to us really through very tight management of the project over the last 3 years. We have $4 million available to put towards athletic fields. The school committee voted in June to use some of our stabilization money, some of our rental revolving funds money to add to that $4 million to create a base bid. Well, we went out to bid in late September, and in early October, we got very favorable bids back. We had over 8 construction companies bid on our base bid, as well as 6 alternates. And those alternates basically were lighting for the fields and a full track. So given the low interest rates, given the competitive pricing that we got, I've met with the town managers a couple times in the last month, and whereas I was encouraged to work with my school committee and finance subcommittee and school building committee to come up with a plan to fund the full phase 1 project, which would require the borrowing of an additional 1.9 million. And that 1.9 million would be used for lighting a track around the football field that's going to be built and some fencing and ancillary equipment. I've been to all of our member towns a couple times. I was in Dover tonight and Lexington tonight, and we're getting a lot of positive encouragement to go through with it. The way that it works under Chapter 7116D, a regional school district, school committee would vote to authorize debt, and then which the school committee did do on Tuesday, last night, whatever night this is, Tuesday, 2 nights ago. And any of the member towns have 60 days in which they could disapprove that vote of the Minuteman School Committee, and no borrowing would occur. So we are, based upon the feedback we got from the selectmen in Concord and FinComs and I think it's been 27 meetings in the last 3 weeks. The school committee went ahead and unanimously voted to authorize that additional $1.9 million to complete phase 1. And I think Christine may have been at some of those meetings, but virtually or otherwise, I don't know.
No, I'm actually, I was at the meetings.
Oh, Lois, okay.
Yeah, hi, I'm a new observer for the Minuteman. So,
Okay.
okay.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I've been hearing your voice now for hours. So, nice to meet you.
Okay, so if I could just summarize for a minute, I think what you're asking is you're going to borrow $2 million over and above I guess it was the 6 million that you're getting from other sources in order to do lighting and fencing for the playing fields at Minuteman. And in order to do this, according to the laws, this will go ahead as long as none of the participating towns call a special town meeting to vote against it.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Does anybody on the Finance Committee have any questions for Dr. B?
I have one question, which is, I know that you're going to be using synthetic turf. And I'm wondering if you could tell me what the average lifetime of those fields will be.
That's a great question. And I'm real excited to talk about the turf because there's no petroleum-based product in it at all. It's all made out of yellow pine, and it has a lifespan, if it's managed really well, of 10 to 12 years. Some people are getting longer out of that. So we're planning to set aside about $170,000 a year out of the revenue that's generated and deposit it into the revolving account, which is where it must go, to set aside that amount every year so that in 10 years we'll have enough money to replace all 3 synthetic. I put synthetic fields in quotes now because of this cool product we have.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Ed?
Christine?
Brian?
Hi.
Yeah, hi. I'm just curious. I mean, I was looking at your PowerPoint slide. Thank you for all this information. Can you just help me sort of understand? I don't want to have you kind of walk through all of it. I'm just curious to know, what's the use case for all of these fields, generally speaking? As I think about baseball, softball, I thought it was a football field, but it looks like a multi-use field. Are there leagues that you are competing in? Like, what's the use? Are you sharing these fields with someone? I think I recall there may have been a conversation with Lexington. I'm just curious to understand that a little bit better, please.
Yeah, so the fields are being striped for multi-purposes. For instance, the softball and the baseball fields, if you look in the outfield, you'll see they're striped where they could be used for, I call it little kid soccer leagues or other kinds of soccer. The football field, the large multi-purpose field, is being lined for lacrosse, for girls fields hockey, for soccer, for Irish football, as well as rugby. Because we've had interest from groups over the years. If it were such stripe, they would be interested in using it. You'll also notice the big field out of the north field on the right. There's a large grass field. That's to accommodate cricket.
Okay. So basically, this is a great revenue stream for you guys.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks. That's all I needed.
Any other questions, Christine?
Superintendent, if I understand it, so I was the prior observer, so I remember the school committee voting on the 6 million, which was the original request, right? And now it sounds like the timing of this, which I think is the thing that makes this a little odd, was that when you got the bids back, it presented itself to be, gee, with just a little bit more, we could get what we really want, which helps you from a revenue perspective. Is that correct? Because the lighting allows you to rent those fields for greater periods of time.
You're absolutely correct. The timing and the good, if there's a silver lining to all this that we're going through, it's that interest rates are low and construction companies are hungry for work.
So if you had waited, so normally you wouldn't come to us sort of off cycle, you would go through the normal budget process and come back and put this debt in our assessment. But because of the opportunity that you see, you've chosen not to do that. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Christine. Because I was wondering, why are you coming off cycle? Good, that helps a lot. So if you are, when you do finally get these and you're renting them out, that offsets the debt service?
Yes, we've been very conservative with our revenue estimates. We did an analysis when we were in discussions with Lexington, because Lexington was going to make a significant contribution to a larger facility than what we're building. And after a year and a half of discussions, we really found that it wasn't a good match. So that was fine. But in the process of doing that, and we sat down with user groups, with potential user groups, including leagues and private leagues, and asked them, what would you want in a complex? And that's what we ended up getting fully permitted, but we're not going to build it all at once. So we're sent our estimates to a company called Ballard and King to review it. And they ended up coming back with much more conservative numbers because they used municipal rental rates as their only rental rate. And so we said, okay, let's use that. And even at, by the time all 3 fields are fully rented, assuming the vaccine is helpful and, COVID is gone, we'd be generating conservatively about $400,000 a year from those 3 lighted fields. And that would pay for the debt service of about $220,000 a year. It would pay for our capital replacement costs about $168,000 a year, and probably offset more operating costs as well.
Okay, I'm still a little troubled though about the timing of this and why this is off cycle and not part of our regular budget routine, so that we go through all of the vetting that we do for all of municipal spending. Why can't we delay the lighting and the fencing until we actually have the normal budget cycle?
Because the contractor won't hold the prices. And we expect that they would increase. He's willing to hold the prices for us until the middle of January.
So you're betting.
And then we would delay not having home fields again. The whole construction process, in other words, if we built the fields as they've been bid, and that bid has been awarded for the base bid, and then later on wanted to do lights, there'd be additional construction mobilization. It would the whole construction project would be out of sync, and we wouldn't realize the cost savings that we're realizing now from this competitive bid environment. It will cost more later, basically.
I understand that maybe the setup costs would cost more later, but who knows what's going to happen with construction costs going forward. That's kind of anybody's guess.
The other piece is, I don't, my video isn't here, but this is Steve Ledoux, the Concord rep to the Minuteman Committee, and I'm also the chair of the Minuteman Finance Committee. And one of the reasons our Finance Committee recommended this is also the fact that what the interest rates are on bonding right now. They're extremely low. One of our member communities just went out to a bond, and I think they got like a 0.65 interest rate. So that was another motivation for moving now, because who knows what's going to happen with interest rates down the road.
Okay. Any other questions?
So this is Dean. I just have a pretty simple question. If it's been voted and there's this 60-day period.
There's no vote. Well, go ahead.
What's that?
There is really no vote, except the school committee voted to do the debt.
Well, there is no vote by our committee, but
yes.
Minuteman voted to approve this. So there's a clock running.
Sorry, go ahead.
The committee voted to issue the debt.
Yes.
And the 60-day waiting period.
Yes.
Is there any requirement on the member towns to hold any other approval, or is there?
No.
We're just assessed at that point. That's just my question.
Yes.
Yeah, it's likely it'll probably affect a little bit in FY22, and then and I think for Concord it's about
$17,000.
$17,000 a year. Yeah.
Okay, so you just put that added to our debt assessment is really what
it'd be part of your operating assessment. Yes.
Operating assessment. Okay. Thanks.
I guess I think because of these are unusual, it's an unusual opportunity that you have in front of you. But I still have an uneasy feeling about spending money without going through the normal process that all spending usually goes through, which is review by the Finance Committee, by the Select Board, a public hearing, and then approval, discussion and approval at town meeting. Whereas this is, your school committee votes to authorize the debt, and we've got 60 days to hold a special town meeting if we want to say no. So it's a very, very unusual way.
It is.
It's very, so that to me feels like this is not something that I would want to see happen often. And
We've never done anything like this before.
I know. I know. You talked about it. So again, I'm worried about a bad precedent, which is, that once we've done it, we might do it again. Yeah, Dee, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question for Carrie along this line. Carrie, can you tell us how will this $17,000 show up right now, or are we taking a bond on it, or what are we going to accrue some debt? How are you thinking about this?
So the district would issue the debt, and the first debt service payment would not be due until fiscal 22.
The district meaning?
The Minuteman.
Minuteman, okay. So Minuteman, and so they will then just be saying, all right, $17,000 is going to be added on to our assessment for the next year.
Yes.
Is that correct? And that will happen for 10 years.
Right.
Correct.
Yes. Okay.
All right.
Good.
We are not issuing any debt ourselves. Is that correct, Carrie?
That's correct.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, the select board has voted on a vote of 4-1 for a non-binding endorsement. And they knew that non-binding means, I think by non-binding, and I think Carrie, you were there, it meant that they wanted to hear from the Finance Committee. And an endorsement, I'm not clear what the intent of that was. So I guess the question to the Finance Committee, is there anyone on the Finance Committee that thinks that we should in fact have a special assessment to hear from the citizens of Concord if they want to in fact take on this added? Nobody? Anybody? Now's your chance.
You mean special town meeting, Mary?
Yes, special town meeting. Thank you.
Okay.
Dee, I see you.
Yeah, the reason I was asking Carrie those questions is because I did go back to look at our financial policy, and I wasn't sure how we were going to be paying for this. And if we had decided to issue a bond, it would have to go and acquire debt. We would have to go in front of town meeting for that. It would have to be a warrant. So I think as long as it's being placed in the budget, we don't have to, you might not like the fact that it's kind of coming out of sequence, but it's not going to hit us until next year anyway. Is that correct?
Correct.
It will be, okay.
Yep.
So
yep, you're right.
It would be at that time, I suppose if people wanted to complain, they could complain about it. But
for the record, just so I'm clear on this conversation, and I appreciate Mary's comment about precedent, but we're talking about $17,000 here.
Well, it's 170 really, but go ahead.
Okay, so what are we talking? Are we talking 170 or are we talking 17? Because if it's 17,000, I think we should just press on here.
You're right. Okay, no, Brian, I agree with you. It's 17,000 a year and it's for 10 years. So it's not a lot of money. It might be offset by revenue. I guess I'm more concerned with the process than I am with I actually think it's a good idea. The playing fields there will be beautiful. The school's beautiful. But I am personally concerned about the process, but not enough to make it. It's more I wanted to bring that out as opposed to stop.
If I could, Madam Chair, just make a point.
Yeah.
We're about to enter into the spring season, to the regular budget season. And this assessment will be part of our budget presentation because it will hit in FY22.
Right.
And we can answer any questions about process and procedure there. So in a way, it's a little bit it's preliminary to the regular cycle because it's going to be part of next year's assessment.
That's right. That's right. I think that
I'm
was,
sorry,
I think that's
this
what,
is Prosser. I don't, so with all due respect,
yeah.
I'm with Brian, right? I mean, it's $17,000. I think we've taken up more time, frankly, than necessary. Mary, I understand your concern about the process, but with all due respect, if the decision's already made now to go ahead and start the construction project, having the conversation about processes next year's budget process is a little bit like closing the barn door after the horses have left, right? I mean, we wouldn't have a choice. We won't have a choice at that point. The deed will have been done, right?
Well, this $1.9 million is in addition to the base bid. We already had the money for the base bid and we started that process, yes.
Right, no, but the 1.9 million, you've already made a decision, which I agree with.
Yep.
That's something we want to do. And
Yes.
well, we will not have a choice about it in the spring, right?
For sure. I think he was referring to the process, not the actual money that we're talking about now.
Right.
I understand.
It wasn't about going and reviewing it. It was about the process of doing it. We could have a discussion about process going forward.
Mary, can I?
Okay. I think what's going to happen. Okay.
That's fine. No.
I agree. We've spent too much.
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead, Kathy.
And it has nothing to do with process. I just have a question about Concord and Minuteman. And that is, how much do the people of Concord use the Minuteman facilities?
There are some Concord groups that use the Minuteman facilities. I can't no one's used any of our facilities for a while because we haven't had any.
Okay.
With the construction, but there are groups from Concord that use it because you're pretty close.
And have you had any conversations, as you said, you had conversations with Lexington. Have you had conversations with any groups here in Concord about your proposed plans and how they might utilize those facilities?
I don't recall. We had about 18 months of meetings that included groups that were outside of Lexington, outside of the Minuteman region, actually, who were interested in, these were private for-profit groups that had pretty robust budgets at the time. And I think some of the folks were from Concord, but I really don't know. If the hours of the field that are available are used primarily during the day for the school, and then the second tier of access goes directly to our member towns. And then the third tier of access goes to nonprofits in the member towns. And then the very last tier, so the very last priority, are some of these other groups that we've been meeting with. So in a way, it becomes an extension of Concord's athletic fields, in a way.
So my question, I'm fairly new to the Finance Committee, is this is a modest amount of money that we're talking about today. But we have I don't understand why that we're talking about their fields when we have so much of our own, and what the intersection is.
Well, Concord is a member of the Minuteman District. Steve Ledoux represents Concord on the Minuteman School Committee, and we try as a good neighbor to make sure everyone has a chance to ask us questions and find out what's going on at Minuteman. And I think Minuteman is your other high school.
Yeah,
you have Concord, Carlisle, and you have Minuteman.
The high school itself needs fields.
Yeah.
They need fields for their own programs. So these are high school fields for that high school, and we're members of that. We have students who
Great. I mean, I'm all for athletic fields.
Mary, I just have a quick question. I think it's more for Carrie, though Dr. B can help me frame it maybe. Carrie, the $17,000 a year, does that just become an addition to that number, which is attributable to our share of the debt service for this borrowing?
Yes.
Is that just attributable to, that becomes part of the assessment that we pay each year to support Minuteman?
Yes.
Yes.
So the point is that it's not our debt, it's Minuteman's
No.
debt. But as a member of the consortium that supports Minuteman, the group of towns, we will reimburse them for that amount of debt service as part of our overall assessment. So it's really what we're talking about is the budget implication for us is increasing Minuteman's assessment by an amount at least equal to this 17K of debt service.
Yes.
Okay. And that lasts for 10 years.
Exactly. Okay, good. Good. Okay, I'm going to take Brian's advice here and wrap this up. I don't see any interest from the Finance Committee to ask for a special town meeting, and I think, personally, I think that's the right thing to do. Thank you very much for your time coming tonight. You've got a beautiful school. Good luck with this, and we look forward to seeing your assessment when we talk about our FY22 budget.
I look forward to seeing you all at Minuteman soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Mary,
Yes.
just one question. Would it be of any interest for the Finance Committee to just make a quick motion of assent that we are in agreement that this is a good thing? The only reason I even bring that up is because 100 people in the town could call a special town meeting. It's all it takes. And we'd be in this kind of weird position of having to talk about this for, I don't know why, but why don't we just say this is a good thing? Why don't we have a motion? I'm happy to make one that we approve of this move.
Why don't we frame it? The selectmen voted on this.
Yeah.
So why don't we frame it that the Finance Committee
endorses
agrees with the selectmen's recommendation, so that we're all together in this. We've taken a consistent.
Lois, that sounds like a great motion.
Okay. You want to second it?
I second that.
Okay, there's a motion. Tell us the motion, Dean.
I believe what Lois just moved or tried to move was
Lois,
that we are in agreement with the approval of the select board of what was the word we were using?
The endorsement.
The select board's endorsement
with the endorsement of the select board for this debt
right.
And we have a second. Thank you, Dean. I'm going to go around and take a roll call. Dean Banfield.
Aye.
Kathy Cuoccolo.
Aye.
Greg Gorillo.
Aye.
John Hickling.
Aye.
Dick Jamison.
Yes.
Dee Ordner.
Yes.
Parashar Patel.
Yep.
Christine Reynolds.
Yes.
Wade Rubenstein.
Yes.
Phil Swain.
Yes.
Brian Taylor.
Yes.
Lois Wassoff.
Yes.
And Andrea, are you still with us? You are. Good for you.
Yes.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, for taking your time to be here today.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt your presentation, Carrie.
Carrie needed a break.
Problem. Yeah, I don't mind the break.
All right. Be safe, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Carrie, can we take you back?
Hold on. Share screen. All right. Here's where we were. So group insurance. I think we finished up with questions on group insurance.
Mm-hmm.
The next of our fixed costs is our OPEB assessment. As you know, we make an annual payment to our OPEB liability. And we get an updated value of this liability at the end of each fiscal year. But the fiscal 22 contribution that we will make is based on the June 30, 19 valuation, because at this point I'm still awaiting the June 30, 20 valuation. And it's very typical that the OPEB assessment that we use is based on a valuation that is as old as this, just because of the timing. So we know what that is. The same thing with retirement. We are using our January 1 valuation as the basis for our fiscal 22 assessment. And just today, I received the certification from PARAC. It was actually dated November 6th, but it just came in the mail, which just validated the assessment that I'm using. The one thing is at town meeting this past September, you will recall that town meeting approved the COLA. It should say COLA base, not COLA change. The increase in the COLA base from 12,000 to 14,000. We had estimated that that would increase the assessment by about 300,000. The PARAC certification, and PARAC is the state oversight agency, says it'll be 312,653. So I'll have to make that adjustment. Other than that, our base assessment for fiscal 22 is level at the fiscal 21 assessment rate. That is because of the earnings of the investment. Our earnings are smoothed over a period of 3 years. So we have some pretty high earnings still that we're smoothing, and we were able to keep the base assessment level. So that's good news. In terms of payroll taxes and other insurance, really with the other insurance, it's early to be projecting what we might see in increases in property, liability, auto insurance, but we typically carry, about an 8 to 10% increase. We have been on the high side because the policy that we're carrying for our cybersecurity, we did add that a couple of years ago, and that's sort of a new line of business, and you can see some increases in that cost. And as you know, we did have an issue with that in the past and made a claim on that. So we might see an increase. We also have some concerns over fraudulent unemployment claims, and we are an employer that we don't carry unemployment insurance. We pay our claims dollar for dollar. We have had about 200 claims, unemployment claims filed this fiscal year. Almost all of them we believe to be fraudulent. So we have to protest those claims. And, up until just today, I saw some information that made me feel a little bit better. But up until today, we were under the impression that if fraudulent claims were paid out, that the town would have to pay for those and wait to see if there was any reimbursement. So that made us pretty nervous. We did see some information today that the Department of Unemployment Assistance is saying it's not going to charge employers for any fraudulent claims. So we'll keep an eye on that. But there's, as you can imagine, an awful lot of fraudulent unemployment claims activity. Debt service, the estimate that we're carrying here covers our existing obligations, which are known, plus an estimate for the fiscal 21 bond issue, the first debt service payment of which will come due in fiscal 22. And then the Minuteman regional assessment, we just talked about that a little bit, the additional debt that will be added. And then the assessment that we receive is based on a 3-year rolling average of enrollment there. So I'll need to get an update on what the enrollment was as of October 1st of this year and what our 3-year rolling average will be. So here, you saw this on another slide, the amount available to guidelines, worst case scenario, best case scenario. Down here, I just made a note that you probably have seen or heard from the superintendent that there is an enrollment shift, another enrollment shift for the district enrollment, which will add to Concord's assessment. Hide. So Concord's share of the assessment in fiscal 22 will be 78.54%, and that is up from the current year. The calculation in fiscal 21, if Concord's share was 78.54 in fiscal 21, it would have resulted in an increase in cost to Concord of $460,000. So in fiscal 22, you know, the shift in enrollment is going to cost something north of $500,000.
Carrie, I have to interrupt right here and try to interpret this slide the way I think about it.
Yep.
Am I interpreting this right to say that in the worst case, if your revenue numbers come in as low as you think they could be, and we will have, with a 2.5% property tax increase, we would have to reduce spending by close to $2 million?
That's correct.
And best case being that if we have a 2.5% property tax increase and your revenue numbers come in on the high side, we would have about $3 million available for guideline spending, of which 466 would have to go to the enrollment shift in the high school.
Correct.
A little bit worse than that, isn't it? Because isn't it a little bit worse than that? Because the 1.9 million cut assumes $1 million from free cash.
No,
No.
it does not assume.
No.
It does not assume $1 million. So if you were to use $1 million, you drop it, you know, cut it in half. If new growth it's not $500,000, but it's closer to 900,000, you would be closing this gap.
Okay.
As well.
And we keep the levy limit at the dollar value or the dollar value that we have now. Is that correct?
Here, it's the dollar value. So
okay.
You kept it at the percent, that would be a couple $100,000.
But we have a few levers. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I want to go back to one thing. So, Mary, in your statement, the tax increase goes by 2.5.
Right.
It really doesn't, because that's what is going through the calculation. But to the extent that revenue is less in non-property tax areas, taxpayers picking it up.
No, you're right. You're right. The way this is working is we're holding that at 2.5 and saying if that's held at 2.5 and we keep the levy limit, the unused levy capacity at the number we were used to, then this is how much we have left over. So
I get that. But the rate that the taxpayer, their bill's going to go up by is not 2.5. It's going to be bigger because they're also carrying the burden of local tax, state aid and so forth being off, right? This tells us how much we can tax.
Yes, you're right.
So it really is up above 3.
It's not pretty.
It is not pretty.
No.
I'm sorry. Can you explain that again?
Go ahead.
Let me just
go back to that revenue page, and you can see.
So here, under the worst case scenario, lowest revenues, highest fixed costs, the impact to the existing base is 2.63%. That assumes the 1.9 million reduction in guidelines. If you can if a budget can be crafted, that is 1.9 million less.
Right. But if it wasn't, let's say it was 0, right? If
it was 0 and you didn't increase any of your other revenue categories, you would add that to property tax, correct?
But can we legally add it to property tax? That's the question. I thought the 2.5%.
You can, because you have
some room.
Unused.
Oh, the unused levy.
Yeah, we have about 4 to 5 million in.
I'm sorry. Forgot.
So could we go
back? Can't Massachusetts be a simple state?
Can we go back to the slide you were just showing us, the revenue, that one? In neither of these cases are we using 2.5% as our number. In the what we'll call the worst case scenario, we're keeping the dollars the same in the worst case scenario, and it's the percentage the same in the other scenario. Maybe I've got that backwards.
That's backwards.
That's backwards. Okay. Okay, thanks. But the point is, what we're managing here is kind of keeping our levy excess capacity available, and we're taxing more than 2.5% and trying to keep some parameter of our taxing of our levy available to us, rather than just trying to say it's a hard number, 2.5%. That's not the way either of these numbers are generated. They're generated to sort of keep the levy capacity, either percentage-wise or dollar-wise, at the same level as the previous year.
Right. We kind of derive it.
We derive it. It's not like we're saying the state says 2.5, so we're
That's
just
right.
plugging 2.5.
That's right.
No, we're saying our levy capacity is what we're trying to preserve, and we can tax anything up to that as long as it's preserving the percentage or preserving the dollar, depending on how you want to play it.
Right. Well, and again, we have our good old SGR, right? Which is
Yes,
at
we do.
point,
Which isn't anywhere near any of these
right?
numbers.
So inflation, and you heard it in the interest rate discussion, right? So they're borrowing at 0.6% because that's what
right.
rates are looking at. So
And that's why they're getting such,
that's exactly right.
So I just have,
So we're going to have fun.
Really, this is hard. This is going to be hard.
just to sum it up, between the two scenarios, there's about a $5 million swing. The main revenue drivers include our estimate or assumption for new growth, potential cut in state aid, potential loss of local excise taxes, and the availability of free cash to reduce property taxes.
And Carrie, the other thing that just timing wise, the middle school, right? So is that going to come? Do we think they're going to come to ask for the budget in the upcoming town?
At the 2021 town meeting?
No.
Yeah.
So it'll be the year after. So
No, it's going to be
special.
I think it's going to be a special town meeting in the fall.
In the fall.
Yeah, it's likely.
So after we vote this budget.
Yes.
Because that's another consideration for us, right?
Exactly.
That's going to be a big number.
Exactly. Yep.
So we really have to think about all those things and the impact on the taxpayer.
So
the thing that I did, which you guys can go back and look at, and I would suggest that you do, is if you go back to what happened in 2008 and what we did, you can see, you don't see much activity in 2008 and 2009, but in 2010, 2011, 2012, you see that the Finance Committee and what their guidelines recommendations were. It's a bit of a different scenario because property values were dropping then. So the tax rates were, your tax bill was going up simply because the valuation of the town was dropping too. But still, it gives us a bit of a history to sort of look at what the town's done when we had very restricted funding before. At that time, they were worried about state funding and local receipts and so forth. Some of the same discussion we had tonight.
I think at our last meeting, we heard that property values in Concord are going down slightly as well.
I know, I was surprised to hear that. Yeah.
So
very little though. Yeah.
Just a little. But still, that was different than I would have expected.
On the high end, yeah. Okay. Any other questions for Carrie?
Carrie, this was great. Thank you so much.
Carrie, this is great stuff.
It's really helpful.
One point I want to make, and this is the fallacy that we spent many years with the 5-year tax projection doing. The way you've done this is all these things are going to break well, or they're all going to break bad. And so you get this wide swing when in fact, state aid might come in okay, and this might come in poorly, and you're going to get a mix. And so it's probably not,
Right.
it's not anywhere near the band of 5 million that you're suggesting is between the good and the bad.
It's a fair place to start. I mean, so Carrie, you think, when will you give us the next update on this?
I think, I don't know that it makes sense to do much before January, before you start.
Right.
When we start having some data on what the state might be doing, might know whether or not there'll be some additional federal assistance for pandemic response. One of the expenditure drivers that is noted is really just the cost of continuing to respond to the pandemic. It's a little easier now because the town was awarded $1.6 million in CARES Act funding, which is federal funding. The school has its own funding. That funding is, runs through December 31st of this year. We don't even know if there'll be additional funding available in the next calendar year. So that, and we've been unfortunately done a pretty good job allocating those funds in. So we do expect to, at this point, we've allocated about $1 million of the 1.6 million. And, we may not be spending the rest of it, but we will lose access to it after the end of the calendar year.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back to this in January with better information and when we need to start making decisions about free cash and guideline percents. I'm going back to the agenda. One of the items on our agenda was an update on the debt subcommittee. There's not a lot to say there. We've met once since our last FinCom meeting. We are working to put together a report out to you all at our December meeting. Does anybody on the debt subcommittee have anything to add to that? That's about it where we're at. Okay, great. Okay. The next item on our agenda is the chair's report. I'm going to just share with you some of the things I'm hearing at the chair's breakfasts and at the select board meetings. As you know, there's a committee that's looking at the StarMet NMI reuse effort that's happening at the 46 acres off of Main Street. That was a Superfund site, and they're going to report back to the select board sometime in early December. That's going to be interesting to us. That's probably going to be something in our ongoing capital plan because there are a lot of ideas that are percolating, including affordable housing for that site. So that's something I think will have to be integrated into the, hopefully the capital plan that will come out of the capital planning task force.
Is there money sort of put aside for that? By the in the Superfund or whatever? I mean, are we going to pay for all this ourselves, or is some of it funded?
I don't know. Okay. I don't know. I assumed the Superfund was just for cleanup, but I don't know. So okay. Hopefully when they report out at the select board's meeting, we'll learn more about that.
Okay.
So this is not a finance committee centric comment, but I would say my first knee-jerk reaction to that is we're going to put affordable housing on a Superfund site. The optics on that are horrible.
I know. Right. Yep. Right.
Like, are you really being serious?
Yeah. Well, okay.
Thank you, Brian.
Point taken, Brian. Point taken.
To comment on what Christine was saying, she had asked whether or not they were going to do more than just clean it up. This committee is coming up with ideas, and if they say we're going to put, say, Public Works over in this area, what they'll do is they'll do some compaction so you can run heavy equipment over there. In other words, they'll do a lot of prep work that is consistent with what the town wants built there. So it's not just we cleaned up the dirt here, have a nice day. They will clean it up and then prep it for the infrastructure that we expect to place in a specific locations.
Exactly.
It's more than just
park.
There you go.
Yep. Okay, so a lot of our questions will be answered, or we'll have preliminary answers or more information certainly when they report back to the select board in early December. I only brought it up here because it might require some capital spending, because I know in our radar we're always thinking of the middle school and other municipal needs that we have. There might be some large capital items on this side as well. I want to remind you that there's going to be the joint workshop between the school committee and the finance committee on December 8th. That's where Jared and Christine will share ideas about what are some of the concepts that we use. We're not going to go over numbers. It's not going to be numbers at all. It's going to be mostly just a glossary of terms, if you will, as far as what is what is circuit breaker, what is SPED, what is OPEB, and Christine will talk about the SGR and the guideline percent. So it's going to be a sharing of ideas of concepts that we encounter when we budget, not numbers. The capital planning task force hearing, which is what we wrote the letter for, has been changed. The date is changed from December 2nd to December 9th. I plan to be there, and I will but I will hopefully articulate a synthesis of the letter that we sent to the capital planning task force. And I want to just say that in a public forum, and anybody else that wants to show up there, you're welcome to attend as well. We talked about this earlier. The assessors were at the select board meeting. They set the new mill rate. The mill rate went from 14.13 to 14.72. There were two reasons for that. I mean, obviously, the mill rate is the numerator is spending, and the denominator is the assessed value of the real estate within town. The denominator went down very, very slightly, very slightly. So the mill rate went from 14.13 to 14.72, mostly because of the increase in the numerator, which is spending. So the denominator, which is the assessed value in town, and it was only it went down very slightly, and that was large. Apparently the large homes in Concord aren't selling as much as they used to, so the assessed value has gone down slightly. Greg.
Where's the mill rate consumed? Like, what's that? I understand the number, but do we use it in any calculation anywhere?
It's how your tax bill is assessed to you. So it's the assessed value of your property times the mill rate.
Oh, okay. Okay. So that's what it is. Okay. Thank you.
Right. And any other questions on that? Great. Okay. What else? The middle school building committee was at the select board meeting. They asked to resume work. They were approved to resume work. And I think, Dean, you'll talk more about this at your observer report. Okay, good. The other thing that came up when the assessors were at the select board meeting was they talked again about the residential tax exemption, which is something where the first $500,000 of assessed value would be exempt from taxation. So it's a mechanism to help people who have homes with a lower market value to have a lower tax bill. And apparently we've looked into this before, and for some reason we didn't implement it. The select board asked the assessors to reevaluate it, and they're going to do that and come back to the select board again, I think in December. I think there are problems with this as far as I'm not sure it's able to really achieve what we're hoping it to achieve, but that's something that we'll learn more about again at the assessors, at the select board meeting when they come back. And that's about all I have from the White Pond Forum, but we'll talk about that later. Quickly, let's go around and do observer reports, but what I'd like to do is I'd like to limit your observer report to the financial implications of the meetings that you're observing. We don't need to know everything. If we could limit it to the financial implications, I think we could get through it a lot faster. So I'm going to start again with my roll call. Dean, do you want to tell us what's going on?
Sure. I have two assignments. One is, we'll just call it generally the climate action portfolio. And I've been sort of juggled between two committees there, Climate Action Advisory Board, and now the Climate, CSEC, Climate Sustainability, Comprehensive Sustainability and Energy Committee, CSEC. CSEC focuses on residential and encouraging residents to do things like change their heating and do this and that. They're looking for where to focus. They're just trying to figure out what buttons to push to try to get residents to fix stuff and make it more efficient, make it net zero, whatever they can do. And CAB, the Climate Action Advisory Board, is trying to push the levers of government. How do we fix our fleet? How do we fix the built infrastructure and et cetera? Neither of them have really come up with complete direction yet, so no report for either of those. However, I am also on the middle school building committee, and as Mary pointed out, they were authorized to move forward. The select board had several questions, but then did give them the the authorization to get going again. That's not starting until December 1st. That's when the select board said they could start. However, just this morning, subcommittee, the design subcommittee met, and they presented some an extensive PowerPoint, which was kind of a come to Jesus moment for the committee. They were at a very large building, 144,000 square feet, and the presentation today showed how they were out of line with MSBA. They were out of line with benchmark communities. They had 3 other benchmark communities which had built middle schools, and they were out of line with that. They were also showing extensive amounts of spare capacity within the building because of the number of classrooms being built. So this pretty much put pushed back on the design, and they're going to have to step back and sort of do some rethinking and reassessing of where they are in terms of, they can't really get out of the feasibility and into the specific design until they kind of reevaluate where they are, and that's going to start on December 1st. And it was really kind of a pushback against what was like a dream school that apparently is quite large relative to a variety of benchmarks. So that was a little preview of them getting started on December 1st, was this design committee kind of nailing a few things on the wall.
So Dean, are they still shooting for a fall special town meeting?
I didn't hear, because it was just a design subcommittee, I didn't hear exactly what the arc of the whole thing is going to be. Mm-hmm. My sense of it was that they may drift the whole thing out, and it may be in the next, assuming the follow-on year is a regular April town meeting, they may drift it that far. I'm not sure though. Yep. That's TBD at this point.
The schools certainly have their hands full now, so.
They do. Phil, yeah.
Dean, is there any chance that they're going to apply for MSBA funding?
That's a great question. That ship may have sailed at this hour this year. I'm not sure. I can ask. I can find out, but I don't know. That would be something that might be coming up at a school committee meeting, and I'm not watching. I'm not monitoring those. So. Because that's a school committee decision to throw that ball over the wall and say, please, maybe we're applying again. So, yep.
Okay, Dean, thank you.
Yep.
Kathy?
Nothing to report. My committees aren't meeting. One's tomorrow and one's in 2 weeks. So next time.
Great. So you'll be able to tell us what's happening maybe with the residential tax exemption.
Hold on, they're not meeting until after Thanksgiving.
Okay.
Retirement boards tomorrow.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you. Greg?
Mine met earlier this week, and I didn't get a chance to attend, and I haven't watched the videos yet, so I will have a double report next week, or next meeting.
Okay. John?
Yes, I did attend my first meeting of the Financial Advisory Audit Committee. And as far as I could tell, Mary, there were no significant financial implications. They approved a couple of letters with no comments and no discussion, and a loan agreement with the broadband light. But they're at the very end of their process, and this was my first meeting, so I'm not sure I understood the whole sequence of progress. So since they were at the end of that process, so not that much to really add. Sorry.
Have you been able to integrate it all with the economic vitality people?
So the first meeting that I attempted to attend didn't exist, and as far as I know, there hasn't been another one yet. So I'm on the lookout for the next one. And I was actually just checking today. I don't know when it is. I haven't seen it on the schedule yet.
Huh. Maybe Carrie can help you with that.
I will continue to pursue that one.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. Dick?
The Rec Commission at their meeting last month, the big item was Little League. but that's all privately funded, so nothing outstanding there. And this month's meeting is going on right now. Actually, they're probably done with it, so I'll have to find out what happened. I did ask them about Dory Kehoe's letter, but I have not received a response back.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Actually, one of the things I think that Carrie brought up when we were going over the revenue sources were some of the transfers from the rec department over to us. Am I right about this, Carrie? And I don't know if this comes up at your meetings or not, Dick, as far as how much they think they're going to be able to transfer over to the town in FY21 or even in FY22. Does that come up?
And you know what, I'd have to go back and look at the meeting agendas. I know that, Beatty is sucking up an awful lot of cash right now. So I'd be surprised if they're transferring a lot of money to the town.
Yeah.
So there's nothing, we've already agreed there will be no transfers from Beatty or Recreation in fiscal 21.
Yeah.
In 21, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Dick. Dee?
The last couple of school committee meetings have focused primarily on policies and also the agenda and initiatives for the superintendent. No money has been discussed. I expect that'll happen at the beginning of next month.
Great. Good. Thank you. Parashar.
The capital long-term planning task force met on Monday. Would encourage everyone to attend the public hearing. Number one, we spent most of the meeting preparing for the public hearing. I think one of the questions is the recommendation on a consolidated long-term plan. Should it also include not just 5 million and above projects, but should it include what we're calling tier 2 projects? Right now they're in separate places in the town and school budgets. One of the questions, should there be in one place? And then of course, what's the process to prioritize, et cetera? So those are some of the issues that we're wrestling with. And so to the extent that we've got an interest, I know, Mary, you're going to come and express our interest, but to the extent that members here have an interest on those topics, you should come and at least express your views as residents, if not finance committee members. So that's it.
Yeah, we didn't really address that in our letter. We just basically said we wanted we thought a capital plan would be. Does anybody have an opinion about that right now that they'd like to share, so that if you don't show up for the hearing, maybe one of us could articulate that?
I mean, I've been articulating as a citizen, and frankly, I think for a finance committee, it makes a lot of sense to have one consolidated document. If you look on the school's budget, and then you look at the town's budget, there are tables showing 5-year spending for capital projects. Very, very brief descriptions of what those are, not much more than here's kind of what it is. And the school also has very, very a light touch on what they are. And so I think if, to the extent that there's more background that's not made public, make those public. It shouldn't be a heavy lift if, as expected, I think the school administration, the town departments and the town administration are doing the work to pull it together. There's probably more information that can be made public. And why not put it in one document, I think is the opinion of a couple of the members of the task force. Which makes sense.
Did you have something? Dee.
Yeah, I have to agree with Parashar that we are not really, at this point in time, I haven't heard anything about addressing when you have facilities that are 50, 60 years old, or that's their lifespan. You're going to have routine maintenance on these facilities that are going to be larger than your $5 million or $5 million break point for tier 3. You can, I mean, it's possible that you can. And I think that those kinds of projects should be included along with new projects.
You mean maintenance on large buildings?
Yeah, if you have a facility that's going to, the lifespan of it is 60 years, you're going to have new roofs, you're going to have new boilers, you're going to have probably new windows, you're going to have new HVAC systems, etc. And that could be more than $5 million.
So, Dee, to be very clear, if it's going to be more than 5 million, one year or multiple years, that is tier 3. And they're.
I know, but are they considering that? Are they considering that kind of work on an existing building?
If it's more than 5 million and it's considered a capital project, which almost, I think by definition, the answer is yes, that would be tier 3.
Okay.
So Parashar, are they considering putting in debt within the levy limit as part of the capital plan? Is that what you're?
Carrie, can you help me out on this? I forgot. So currently, I don't have the tables in front of me. The 5-year tables, Carrie, that are in the budget is where's the debt service in there? Is it in there or it's not in there?
So tier 1 is cash. Tier 2 is debt, both within the levy limit.
Good. Thank you. Okay. Good. We'll be there. Hopefully, we'll be at the hearing, and I'm glad to hear that you're expanding that. Okay. Anything happening with planning, Parashar, that you want to?
I have not gone to the last couple of meetings. The agendas did not appear that it was anything of financial impact.
Yeah. There's several large developments in town that I think might help our new growth numbers.
Offset by additional costs, but that's a different story.
Right. Okay, thank you. Chris.
Yeah, so CPC, they're still in their deliberations. So they finished their initial rounds of hearing from applicants. In the last meeting, they started their deliberations on each of the projects. They've gotten preliminary, opinions on a number, I would say, of the smaller ones. The large ones that probably have the most interest to us, the ones that are $300,000, $200,000, $500,000, they're still looking for more information or they have more discussion. So they're in their deliberation phase. Dee?
Yeah, Chris, do you get the bulletin from Stuart Sagener?
I don't. Mary shared it with me early on. I should get that. Yeah.
I'll forward the latest issue of that, because in that it says that the match is going to be 28.6% this year.
Yeah, Carrie, I think the number that they were showing, and maybe it might be updated, but it was like maybe 1.4, 1.5 million. Is that right?
It has been updated. I just updated it on Monday, and it's 1.87.
Oh, okay, 1.87. And they have requests of about 2.4, 2.5. So they have to do some whittling. Yeah.
Good.
I'll send you the email so that you can then get on their distribution list.
That'd be great. Thank you, Dee.
Okay.
Anything else you want to say about the guideline?
No, I think what we saw tonight was good. As you see, we have our work cut out for us. Think about what you want to do. I'm pretty conservative on reserve, so I think we're going to have some interesting discussions about free cash. So,
okay, Wade.
Housing Development Corp meets this coming Monday, so I've got nothing to report.
Okay. So Wade, apparently what I'm hearing is that there are two requests for money for affordable housing on the horizon. One would be $500,000 in free cash. Yep. And then I think there's a CPC request for $500,000 from the Concord Housing Development Corporation. So that's something that we're gonna have to talk about later, because it looks like we've got two people trying to get the same pot of money.
That's my understanding.
Yeah. So keep an eye on that for us. I'd appreciate that. Phil, you got anything from Public Works?
There was no meeting, but just a couple of things. One is the materials they circulated for the meeting, which will be next week, included a reference to a grant that the town has gotten for sustainable activities. It's basically the recycling program. So there's $7,200, but to their credit, they did apply for this grant and brought in $7,200. And then the other thing is that there is going to be a executive session next week on the litigation involving the Gog Pond. So I had understood that was over, but apparently it's not. So that may be a further expenditure that we have to keep an eye on.
For what, legal fees?
Yeah, I assume legal fees and who knows. I thought it was resolved favorably, but it's a battle between Concord and Acton and Littleton over in the Gog Pond. So there may be something going on with that.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thanks for keeping an eye on that. Brian.
Library committee met on Tuesday. Nothing financial to report, but I do want to just take a quick second to give a shout out to Robin Demis. I don't know her, but the announcement was made after 35 plus years of service as the circulation supervisor. She has announced her retirement. Anybody that contributes service to our town deserves special recognition. I just want to say thanks for her service.
Thank you. Thank you, Robin. Lois. You're muted. Lois, you're muted.
Sorry, I think the superintendent of the Minuteman School District gave my observer report. I was there at the meeting on Tuesday, and we've kind of gone over what happened, the vote. And so I don't think I have anything to add to that.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Andrea.
So just a couple things. There was a meeting for the Council on Aging today. I was a little bit late, so I'm not sure what committee they've. I had suggested early on that they might want to have a few people observe some of the other committees in town and find out more about what was going on for senior housing. So somebody went to a committee meeting, Grantham, talking about the project in West Concord. Grantham had reported in September of 21, they hope to, they're waiting to secure financing for the project. She had some questions about access and transportation that apparently a lot of things were not clear on the project. Access, they're going to be studio and 1-bedroom apartments for the most part. And I suspected a little bit of disappointment and confusion on what was going on with this project. And we experienced some of that ourselves. The other thing was there was a request for a letter of support for the CPC, to the CPC, a letter of support from the Council on Aging for $185,000 restoration project on the Timothy Wheeler House on Walden Street, which has 7 rooms it's based on age, not finances, but it's for independent living. There are no medical services there. It's all kinds of other service, but not medical service. But it's a historic building that needs a lot of restoration, they've come up with a number of 185,000, and this would go into the CPC budget apparently. And that's about it financially.
Great, thank you, Andrea. So I have a question for you, Chris. Maybe you can answer this. This $185,000 CPC that Andrea just mentioned for the Timothy Wheeler, is there also a request into CPC for the house on Harrington Ave as well? Because do you know?
Yeah, well, I don't, the 185 is the house on Harrington Ave, the one with the land and there's a farm and a barn?
Yes,
there is. But that one is just for they want to hire a consultant to I forget what a facilitator to gather some information and develop a plan or a vision for that property. So that's a $20,000 request.
Okay, good.
But you can assume that in the future years, they may come back with the plan and what they need for the plan. But the current year's request is small on that one.
And what is that called? Is that the Wheeler Harrington
Structures report usually?
What?
Historic structures report?
No, that's not what this is.
It's not.
Nope.
Okay.
Okay,
it's coming from the planning department, right?
I'm sorry?
Yes, it's from Marcia. Yes, it's from the planning department, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
this is something.
It's called Wheeler Harrington. That's the name that they have.
Wheeler Harrington, thank you. That's how I always get
this on our list for a few years.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Wheeler Harrington is the small
20 grand.
But the big one is the Timothy Wheeler. Okay, great. Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you for that.
Hey, can I ask a quick question? I don't want to belabor this too much, but Andrea, going back to your the Grantham's situation, if I recall correctly, Massachusetts gave them the LITIC, the tax credits, and now they were looking for a buyer, right? So was the point they're having trouble securing a buyer just given the market, or was
the only report
color there?
The only report that it was given was they are waiting to secure financing, hopefully by 9/21, and then break ground sometime in 22.
Okay, thank you.
And I think the Concord Housing Development Corporation, which is really the group that's shepherding the Grantham project, would have answers to that question.
Maybe that was the committee. Maybe that's where it.
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
like I said, I
know more.
Late, so I wasn't sure.
We'll know more. We'll know more Monday night.
Okay.
You're covered.
Thanks, Wade.
Good.
Thanks, Wade.
Good. Great. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. That was good. That was very well done. The next thing on our agenda is some correspondences. We've got 3 correspondences that I think I should respond to. So I'm just going to outline to you what my response will be, and you can tell me if you think this is appropriate. Dory Keogh sent us an email about the White Pond Forum, and I am going to respond to her saying that we are watching it, and the ways that we will weigh in on that would be through a review of the CPC article and a review of the town's municipal capital plan. So that is where we will have our discussion and recommendations as far as any funding for White Pond. That sounds fair? That's good? Great.
Yeah.
The 2 letters that we have from Susanna K, Dr. K, I was thinking of responding and basically saying that this is really outside of the purview of the Finance Committee, and that our interest really is only in the legal expenses, which we will be carefully looking at when we develop our budget. But the rest of it is really something that it's the select board's responsibility. Does that sound right to everybody? Yeah, Dee.
Yeah, I don't have any question about what you plan to write. I think that's an adequate response, but I do have a question for Carrie. Carrie, can you tell us how much money has been spent on the litigation so far this year, or if there are any bills that have come in that haven't been paid, or what's the status?
Just opening up my spreadsheet because I don't commit that to memory. The Estabrook litigation year to date is $124,616.29. That is through 10/31. 20.
Mary,
And
this
what,
is
are there any
Marshall.
other outstanding bills?
I don't know what has been incurred yet this month.
Okay.
I think I appreciate where Dee is going with this, which is, I don't know, what do we have in the budget this year? Is it 375?
I think it's 325.
No, we have $344,585 for all legal.
Okay.
Okay, I think what we want to do is we want to avoid the discussion about the reserve fund transfer that we had last year. So keeping a good eye on spending relative to budget is something that maybe we want to take a closer look at in December.
Mary, this is
I can tell you, I update the town manager on a monthly basis on the budget, on the legal budget.
Carrie, are we getting budgets from the outside counsel for each of the next phases?
That Phil, I don't know the answer to it. I'm not involved in the litigation or strategy in any way. I just pay the bills. So yeah. I can't answer that question.
You don't know? Okay. Well, for what it's worth, if you talk to the town manager, I'd suggest that he ask for a budget. That's something that clients usually ask for, especially when the litigation has gotten this expensive.
Mary,
We've been asking for that regularly. Parashar, go ahead.
So I would just encourage us and you to be careful about the language, the way you said it to me. One could interpret it, and maybe you didn't mean it this way, but one could interpret it to mean that through our budget conversations, we may exert some control over the spending and future costs. And so, perhaps not give the impression of being able to do more than as a FinCom we can do, right? Because at the end of the day, one of the questions I have is as we go through the budgeting process, I'm going to take an extreme hypothetical. If we wanted to zero out spending for legal services of any kind, we can, I'm asking, is that a recommendation that the FinCom is ever in a position to make line item by line item or not? Because if it's not, then I think we just ought to be careful as to how much month to month watchdog role we have, or even at the beginning of the budget process, where to spend the money and how to spend the money. So
I completely echo that comment. I agree with that. I think we have to be careful how you frame the response. It's, especially given the tone of the correspondence, I think you want to be careful not to give the impression that we are engaged at a level that she seems to be assuming we are. So you might actually start with a little statement that sets expectations by describing in a sentence what it is the FinCom does, and why, therefore, we're not in a position to respond to this, to the specific concerns that she's raising. She's welcome to raise them with the select board, and we will perform our function of developing the budget looking forward.
Well, actually, we do make recommendations on the line item budget for the town. And I don't want the letter to be in any way giving the impression that we're in charge of the budget or we're in charge of the spending. Right?
Yeah, that's why I'm suggesting that level setting sentence at the beginning, which would include that.
Is this just an informational for us, dude? Like, do we have to respond to it? Other than Phil, because he's listed in the 2 line. I don't know why that is, but
well, that's a good question. Do we have to respond, Carrie?
She just said forwarded. She didn't say like I'm looking for FinCom's response to this letter.
Actually, she
I'm liking that comment.
She has asked for responses, and so
I think we should.
Not directly in this letter, though, right?
Not directly in this one, no. But
right. And
I think as a courtesy, I actually think as a courtesy we should respond.
Yeah. I agree, Mary. I think we should definitely respond.
We definitely respond, and we should be clear on what the finance committee's role is relative to this, and our role is to, I guess if I could say it as, our role is to help the town manager set the budget for legal expenses for the year, and to over the year make sure, or not make sure, we don't even make sure, but we monitor to hopefully that they come in within budget. And I don't even know if I want to get into the conversation about the reserve fund at this.
Yeah, respectfully, I feel like.
Mary,
slow down.
Mary,
Yeah.
Mary, I would be very careful about writing a response. If you do, you should run it by council.
Exactly.
I really think
totally
it's very dangerous to write a response. I know, and in the correspondence, she mentions that she has not received, or they have not received responses, and it's
everything that we
everything that I've been taught. You're better off not answering her.
Okay.
But if you do, please go to council.
Let me recommend this then, so we can wrap up this. I'll say thank you very much for your correspondence.
Great.
And close the loop, which so that we've read it, we have read it. Thank you very much. So it's an acknowledgement that we read it without having to get into explaining what our role is, what we can or can't do. Just thank you very much.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think Kathy's point is very well taken. I just looked back at the email again while we were having this conversation.
Yep.
This is an ongoing litigation.
We don't
want to get involved with saying something that might be construed as being inconsistent with positions that the town is taking in other circumstances. At the most, an acknowledgement, we received your car. I'm just writing to let you know to acknowledge receipt of your correspondence.
Thank you.
If you respond at all, and I actually think you don't have to respond to that. But
okay. Steve, what do you think?
Well, I was just going to say that we have received emails before on Estabrook and have not taken any action on them, and I think it was probably Dean was still chair at the time, and no response was sent to the person. I think also if somebody is watching our Zoom meeting, they would know that we have looked at it, that we have discussed it in certain ways, like how much have we spent to date on litigation. And that's really all of our response. That's, to me, the limit of our responsibility.
When
Phil, Andrea, sorry, what do you think?
When we discuss the budget litigation, we don't discuss, we pass make recommendations on a legal budget. There may be so much for, I don't know, NAGOG or the schools or Estabrook, but it's the legal budget, isn't it?
Yes.
We don't separate out.
That's right. That's correct.
And make recommendations on each thing. So
that's true.
I just want to kind of put a nail in this coffin if I can. And what that basically
is. You're good at that, Brian.
Is that, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, we were talking about, I think, this, and for whatever reason, I was asked to provide a little more detail around some specific comments around this particular issue, which is fine. But the point is, Lois's point is actually the point, which is this is open litigation, and we are not representing either side per se, and we don't want to be in conflict with legal counsel. So the less we say, the better. And we should just leave it at that. We've received it. We've acknowledged it. They're probably going to watch it on recording. We should move on.
Dean, I'd like to hear what you think.
Me?
Yeah.
As the former chair,
yes,
we acknowledged it in the meeting, and generally speaking, I did not respond to these letters. Now, she then mentions that she has not received responses. So I'm being called out for not having responded in her correspondence this time. So yeah, but that was my choice to just acknowledge it and we really didn't even spend this much time on these in the meetings. It was like, we got this correspondence.
Right.
Maybe you have any comments? No, not really. Okay, thanks. And so that's how I went, and right or wrong, that's what I did.
So my inclination is to respond very briefly and say we received your correspondence. Thank you very much.
Nothing wrong.
So I actually don't even think we should do that. Only because once you do, you're going to invite more direct dialogue. This wasn't really even addressed to us. So, and there's no question that was asked of us directly. So I think that once you start down this slope, you're going to end up having to respond. And even if you just have to acknowledge receipt each time, it's going to get to be a burden. And since it's not addressed directly to us and doesn't ask any questions of us directly, I don't think we should say anything at all.
So just following up on what Phil said, this isn't a definitive statement, but I don't recall any letters from this family being directed directly to the FinCom. Like, hey, you guys wake up and do something. They were generally not, we were CC'd, or it was, distribution, or just like this, it generally speaking. So, but there may have been one or two, but I don't recall any that were actually directly.
Well, in this, just looking back at the actual email, there's a request made that the letter be provided to the FinCom. So there was a specific request made that the letter be provided to us. But Carrie, yeah?
I was just going to say, if it's of any help, anytime you receive, or anytime I receive correspondence from you via email, I send a letter, an email back acknowledging receipt of the email and affirming that I have passed it on to the members of the Finance Committee.
And I think we've already responded. It was sent.
I do.
Sorry, maybe I should.
No, I think that's fine. I think that was the right response. And I think maybe.
Thank you, Carrie.
Required.
Okay, that's all I needed to know.
Yep.
Good. Then okay, and this video is obviously available to whoever wants to watch it.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Carrie, you're on the agenda.
I have nothing in addition.
Good. Okay. Are there any people watching here who would like to make a comment?
There are 3 attendees. I don't see any raising their hands.
Let's give a minute.
There is a question in one of the Q&A boxes.
There is, but this was for when the Minuteman people were here. So
okay.
Yeah, and
that wasn't a hearing, so we didn't really have to entertain questions.
I didn't see that question while they were still here.
I didn't either, but it wasn't a hearing, so.
So no.
Do you know the answer, Carrie? Just out of curiosity.
No, I actually don't.
Okay.
I don't.
They might have.
So if there's nobody that wants to raise any additional questions from the public, can I make a motion to adjourn?
Absolutely.
So moved.
Okay, we got to go around and take a roll call or we can't go home. Dean.
You're muted.
Please.
Kathy.
Yes.
Greg.
Yes.
John. John's gone. Dick Jameson.
Yes.
Dee.
Yes.
Parashar.
Yes.
Christine.
Yes.
Wade. Phil.
Yes.
Brian.
Yes. Have a great evening, everybody.
Lois.
Yes.
Andrea.
Yes.
You stuck in. Thank you very much, everybody. See you
Happy
next month.
Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving.
You too.
Bye.
Ron.
Be safe.